If you guys have been following my E55 videos, you'll know that this spot is where it used to sit in my driveway, leaking oil pretty much all over it. But the car is now sold, and today we're gonna talk about how much it cost me to own for 6 months, and I'm gonna give you guys some advice if you are a prospective buyer of an E55. Well, I'm left standing here with the only thing I have to remember my E55 by, and that is a OBD2 code reader. This code reader, my E55 and I got to know each other pretty well over my course of ownership because that car threw so many check engine lights. But some of you have a keen eye and saw the car on Craigslist, and I also begrudgingly posted it on Facebook. And I got a lot of messages asking, is this the E55 from YouTube? Yes, it was. And no, it's not still for sale. It is sold as of a couple days ago. So now that it's sold, it's time to do my typical debrief video, because that's really what this channel is about. You know, a lot of different channels will give you a review of a car, what it's like to drive, which is super valuable and super great, but they don't talk about what it's like to own them used, what are some of the common problems, and how much it's gonna cost you. And that's exactly what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna detail all the things that I had to fix on the car, how much they cost, and I'm gonna leave you with some advice on buying an E55 if you are so inclined. So let's dive in. I'm gonna start with the cost of the car, and then we'll get into the advice section.
All in all, I got off pretty easy and didn't have too many expensive fixes on this car. The most expensive was the oil lines, and of course this happened right before I was going to sell it. The oil lines run from the oil filter housing to the oil cooler and were sort of a pain to remove and install. I did all the work myself, and wouldn't you know it, these lines still cost me $325 in just parts. They had to be specially ordered from Mercedes dealership and took a few days to get in. I also had to replace the wiper motor which went out on this car. This was an easy job that didn't take much time or any expensive tools to fix. The wiper assembly is shared with all E-Class Mercedes of this vintage, so fortunately they were cheap and plentiful. $50 from the local junkyard, and while I was at it, they had a wiper cowl that was in better condition than mine, so I ponied up an extra $10 and bought that as well. $60, the wipers were sorted. The next cost was something more peace of mind and quite small. I didn't trust the electronic oil level reading that this car has from the factory. It's not my thing, I just like manual dipsticks. So I bought a dipstick on Amazon for $10 to accurately read my oil level. For $10, it seemed like money well spent. Outside of these parts, I did have some random issues come up that I was fortunate enough to fix for free. I had an evap hose pop off the back of my engine, and thanks to a code reader and a little snooping around the engine bay, I fixed by simply plugging that hose back in. The hood ajar message popped up constantly when I bought the car, and that turned out just to be a sensor out of alignment, also fixed for free with a little bit of troubleshooting. I'm all about the free fixes if you're willing to put in the time. I ended up breaking even on the sale of the car, meaning I sold it for exactly what I paid for it. So if you add up the oil lines, the wiper assembly and cowl, along with the dipstick, that's what it cost me to own this car for 6 months, $395.
So let's get into why I sold the car and some advice if you are interested in buying an E55. And there's a reason I've come into the garage here with my GT350 and 240SX, which I'll get to in a minute, but bear with me here. Let me start first by saying all cars on this channel have a shelf life. I've sort of built this channel around variety, and it wouldn't be a very exciting channel in my opinion if I just had the same car all the time. And once I sort of buy it and sort it out, I just kind of like drive it around reliably. I say this because I didn't necessarily sell the E55 because I didn't like it or because it was trash or anything like that. I just sold it because 6 months is pretty average for how long I own a car. So I just wanted to start with that. Now, with that said, what were my expectations going into E55 ownership? I have owned a lot of older German cars, so I sort of knew what to expect when it came to reliability, and my expectations were pretty low, I'm not gonna lie. But even then, with low expectations, I was still a little bit surprised. Mostly because when I bought that car, and you guys can reference the older videos I have with that car, I thought it was basically completely sorted. There are a couple things that commonly go wrong with E55s, and I've sort of made a video about that. They were pretty much all addressed. Things like the air suspension always goes bad. This car had coilovers. Things like the SBC pump, which controls the brakes, that always goes bad. That was sorted. It had new coil packs, new plugs, just all kinds of maintenance for common things that go wrong with these older cars. But despite that, I still had a bunch of random things that came up. And I think that's the first takeaway with E55s, is that no matter how sorted you think a car like that is, a 15-year-old, very complex at the time German car, expect the unexpected. And now as far as advice for buying E55s, or maybe which one to buy, when I bought this car, I sort of broke a rule of mine, and that's that I don't really like to buy modified cars for the most part. The reason for that is, no one does it better than OEMs. Like, OEMs do so much testing on cars and stuff like that, which aftermarket companies just don't have the capability to do. Maybe they want to, and there are certainly some aftermarket companies that do a better job than others, but it's really hard to get a well-done, tastefully modified car that isn't going to give you a bunch of problems. Now, there was one mod that I thought this car had which was beneficial, and that was the coilovers. I've already mentioned that these cars have air suspension from factory, which always fails, and converting it to fixed coilovers, while it did increase the stiffness in the ride, which I wasn't super happy about, it made for me not having to worry about it, and I knew I could go anywhere and not having it break. So that was one, I'll say, good mod. But the rest of the mods didn't really add too much to the car and sort of just made it more annoying. So it had a full exhaust, which typically I like a good exhaust so I can hear that exhaust note, especially of that 5.4 liter V8. But, these were Chinese headers, and it was a full exhaust with no cats, which I think is kind of dumb. And even though it was a fairly quality exhaust according to E55 owners, the exhaust tips were always coming out of alignment, and that just bugged me to no end. So, once again, no one really does it better than OEMs. Just maybe put like a cat back on it or something like that, just so you could hear the exhaust, but keep the cats, like headers. The car already had enough power. Next on the list, it had an ECU tune, which I think was just okay. I think it ran pretty rich, if I had to guess. And last, the car had an E63 front end conversion, which made the car look awesome. I'm not gonna lie, it made the car look way more modern than it was. So was a huge fan of that. However, it also had an aftermarket front lip, and being that it was already on coilovers and low, the front end conversion made it even lower, which was sort of annoying to daily drive because you're constantly worried about getting in and out of driveways and not scraping the front bumper. So I know most of this is just gonna sound like this is what owning a modified car is, and I totally get it. And that's finally why we're standing here. Like, I have this 240 SX that I LS swapped, and it is obviously super modified versus my GT350, which is very much stock. And you can better believe that this car is stock. It works great. It's flawless from the factory. That car, it takes stuff to do. Like, it takes things to fix. I already mentioned the coilover thing. It's low, so you got to be careful where you drive it. So overall, that is just owning a modified car life. But I just wanted to kind of give you guys that advice when it comes to E55. Buy one closer to stock. I wouldn't buy one with a bunch of mods. They're great from the factory, and they really don't need to be any faster than they already are. So in the end, would I recommend an E55 to those of you who are looking? Well, the answer is yes, with a bit of a caveat, and this often happens. It happened exactly the same way with my 335i, which I loved. It's one of those cars that is an absolute joy to drive when it works, but the biggest problem is it's going to break. No matter how sorted it is, as I mentioned before, there are going to be little things that come up. So the caveat is, if you're willing to work on your own car and get your hands dirty, which I think you should, there's a ton of resources for these cars online, then go for it. Like, go and buy one. They're super cheap and they're really cool cars. But know that it's going to break, and know that, if you have to take it to a dealership, if you're not someone that will fix it yourself, you're going to pay a ton of money getting this thing fixed. Well, guys, that wraps up the E55 ownership. I know oftentimes when I do a sell video as opposed to a buying video, a lot of you get bent out of shape because, you know, maybe you own an E55 or you're looking to buy one and you're sad to see it go. I totally get it, but once again, know that this channel is kind of all about transitioning through cars and kind of seeing what else is out there. So I encourage you guys to subscribe and stick around for the next car, because this is just an evolving journey of rotating cars. And it always tends to be exciting because whenever you buy a used car, there's always things that need to be fixed. So I like to cover the DIY stuff along with some of the reviews and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the E55 ownership. Stick around if you did. There will be another exciting car in the future, which I'm gonna keep that on the down low about. You can speculate all you want about that. If you want to check me out in between episodes, you can check me out on Instagram at Eat Sleep Drive TV. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll see you on the next episode of Eat Sleep Drive.